So I think you're going to see people sort of demanding that the ROI of your observability system come from more than just engineering.
I don't know that we're helping people solve the right problems and get the right information at the right price. If we're to come up with one metric that matters, it's how much data that you emit do you ever look at? And I feel like as an industry, we should try to optimize that.
Hello, I'm Martin Thwaites.
I'm Charity Majors.
And you're listening to Observability Cast, or o11ycast for short. A monthly series where we talk about how we can make production systems more observable, more reliable, and easy to maintain. o11ycast is brought to you by Heavybit, the leading investor in developer-first startups. For more information, visit heavybit.com.
I think one of the things that's interesting here is, as an outside observer, one of the things that I noticed is you have a trend of an incumbent company that becomes known for having this mindset shift or a paradigm shift in how you approach a problem. And it's so easy to take a mindset shift or a paradigm shift and then reuse the word or reuse the label. Keep your old thing the same. And then because you have so much inertia in the market, whatever they do, you can avoid talking about the mindset shift, avoid talking about what's actually happening underneath the scenes. And because it's a line item at the end of the day for most executives, it's not legible anyway. They're going, we have this company. They say we provide value to the business. You have this other company. They provide value to the business, but only if you hold the box sideways. And that's about as understandable as the conversation can really get. And so if someone just copies the word over, they don't need to change the product, they don't need to evolve it, they don't need to actually do something.
It's so much cheaper to talk about what we're doing than to build it. Talk to me about Datadog's infinite cardinality sometime, I dare you.
Look, I think from my perspective, as I was saying before, I will admit, being recorded right now, that my Observability 3.0 was a marketing post. And, I don't believe in as much in the versioning as Charity was saying. And even though I am a vendor now, I am a longtime system operator. So I'm an observability user, and I've been one for many, many years. And where I'm coming from is, trying to think about how I could have better solved my own problems. And then now as a vendor, how can I better solve customer problems? And where my post came from, just stepping back from a technology perspective, is, as I'm sure we'll get into, there is a cost crisis in the industry. We all have many opinions on what that means. And, I think as an operator, I've been frustrated for decades at this point on the inability to get the information that I need to solve actual end user customer problems and do that in a quick way, even setting aside cost. And I believe, again, setting aside versioning, that there are paths forward that we can take in the observability space that will allow us to, solve customer problems faster and hopefully do that at a cost point that's actually lower. So, if it's helpful to talk about versions and the technological underpinnings of that, I think that's useful. But from a 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 perspective, again, I'll be the first to admit that that's entirely marketing.
So we've got two amazing guests on with us, Charity. So I think it's probably important for people to understand the context of where these people come from. So Hazel, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us about you.
So my name is Hazel Weekly. I have thoughts, lots of thoughts. They never stop thinking. And I do systems thinking. I deal with complex socio-technical problems. I write about it. I talk about it. And I try to help the industry and people figure out how to work with each other, how to collaborate, and how to actually take really, really complex systems and understand how to work with them and learn together. And then how do you scale that? How do you think about that? How do you do that better? That's kind of what I do.
Awesome. And we've also got somebody else on with us. Matt, tell us about you.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. My name is Matt Klein. I've been in the industry for quite a while at this point. Most of my career has been working on low-level systems like operating systems, virtualization, those types of things. About 10 or 15 years ago, I went into the application internet space, mostly in the networking area. worked pretty early on in Amazon Web Services, and then worked at Twitter and then Lyft. While I was at Lyft, I created a popular open source project called Envoy. And then a couple of years ago, I started a company called Bitdrift, where I'm the CTO, and we're building a mobile observability solution.
Amazing. And I mean, most importantly, everybody here has wrote some kind of post around versioning observability, which is why we're here to talk about stuff. So we've got 2.0, we've got both Hazel and Charity who mentioned that. And obviously, then Matt just went right over the top and went, we don't need to. It's fine.
So when it came to 3.0, before I finished writing it and published it, I actually went to Charity and I said, "Hey, Charity, I'm about to kind of rain on your parade a little bit. Are you going to hate me forever?" And she said, "Absolutely."
Yes.
But the reason I wrote the blog post is it's not really about versioning observability, but I titled it Observability 3.0 because I knew it would get people discussion and talking about it. And the thing that I really wanted people to talk about was when I was trying to get the conversation shifting over to why we got here in the first place, which was we don't have a good way to talk about what we actually do with the observability thing. It's one way to say, oh yes, we help engineers debug and troubleshoot the systems. But there's no way for us to really articulate and package that up in a nice way. We've just never done it. And so my Observability 3.0 post was really, hey, look, you have Observability 1.0 as this box for this approach that often has these tools, and it talks about these types of questions, these types of answers that you have about your system. It tends to have these limitations. You have Observability 2.0 that has a mindset shift and has a paradigm shift. And it allows you to ask about different types of questions at a different point in your troubleshooting and debugging experience and your understanding the system. But ultimately, you limit it to with a certain shape. It's within engineering. It's all about having your data, in a sense, in the same kind of format, so you can query it in a certain type of way, tends to be implemented in this way. And Observability 3.0 was really the box that I put around what happens when understanding the system becomes socio-technical. When it becomes, it's not just engineers, it's not just system engineers, it's not just product people, it's not just the people in the CTO org. What happens on the system? Holistically, is the entire company. Whenever you stop breaking down having these silos, whenever you stop dealing with things and putting it in a tiny little box. And if you can do that, then you can start to ask very, very sophisticated questions that historically have been not your problem. So many engineers might ask the question, hey, is what I'm building actually driving revenue? That's not your problem, is it, Mr. Engineer, Miss Engineer, whatever? It's not your problem. Worry about your code.
Nobody says that.
So many people. I know. I'm surprised too. Most companies that I worked at, I've asked those questions. And people say, that's not your problem. Stick in your lane.
Well, that's a shitty place and they should quit and go find a new job. I think on the long arc of history, though, I think we're all kind of aligned that it's moving towards a data-like style model. And I think that the sort of journey that with the proliferation of pillars and signals and everything getting stored in its own location, the problem is that as your bill goes up, the experience actually goes down. Like the value that you get out of them actually gets worse because what connects them? You do. You sitting in the middle of all these fucking pillars going, well, that shape over there looks like that shape over there, so they're probably the same thing. Or
right.
This request ID over here is oh shit, we sampled it out of the tracing tool. We don't, and it's absurd. First of all, the cost multiplier, Gartner put out this research and they showed their customers on average use 10 to 20 tools. So at minimum, every request that enters their system is getting stored 10 to 20 times. That is a hell of a cost multiplier. Your observability bill is going up 10 to 20x as fast as your business is growing at a baseline, which is just It's untenable.
And what you're describing is, at least for me, why we started Bitdrift. Because again, like as an operator, I was exposed to the cost explosion. I was exposed to not only the cost and the data multiplication, but that data is often written, it's rarely read. A vast amount of observability data is never read, like not by a human, not by a machine. It's written and it effectively goes to dev null. And even if storage is free, let's just, take that as a hypothetical point. And I think a lot of times vendors and users are, quick to talk about how storage is getting cheaper and cheaper, but that does not account for network transfer and compute and all of the ancillary costs that are actually quite expensive. And especially from the mobile world where the costs are even more, right? Most large organizations that have mobile applications, they understand that the amount of data that you send and receive from the phone, it has implications on the end user experience. And for many large mobile applications, this sounds crazy. The applications send more in analytics data than they do in actual application data. It is crazy. And I have been in so many incidents in my career where the data from the analytics system was dwarfing the application data and the application stops working. So I'm just saying that cost is larger than just storage. It's all this data that's never read. It's having application impacts. It's the fact that once the data is there, you have to sift through all of it to find what you actually want. It's a complicated issue.
One of the things that this really reminds me of is, and you're seeing this in a couple different areas, all at once. But one, you have the system, and you have all these sort of levers of things, and you don't feel the pain or you don't feel the feedback of something. It's really easy to build all these layers of innovation or evolution that don't take certain factors into account. And then because you don't optimize it, it's worthless. Or you don't minimize something because you don't need to. You can build a system that becomes grotesque over time. AI is actually a fantastic example of that. One of the huge hypes around AI recently is DeepSeek. And it turns out the main innovation of DeepSeek was they just didn't have 5 mountains worth of GPUs lying around. So they said, oh, what if we just tried for more than 20 fucking seconds to minimize data transfer between GPUs? And then they got like 2 orders of performance just by picking it up off the ground. And we have these microservice architectures. We have these unlimited internet. You have this, 100, 400, 500, whatever fucking gigabit networks. You have these network NIC cards in the cloud. People go, oh, I can transfer terabits per second, petabytes per second between things. And then, oh, this is free, that's free, this is instantaneous. 10 years later, 15 years later, mobile finally gets involved in the picture. People go, one of our websites didn't break. And then, oh, it turns out a system that has never once said, why don't we just care even the tiniest bit about the logistics of storing or handling or thinking about this telemetry? And we just never cared about it for 10 years. So obviously, it's great that companies like Embrace or, Bitdrift can come in and say, look at all this fucking free candy on the ground that nobody's ever picked up, and it's called cost optimization. Network bandwidth, optimization. This cool thing at the client side. Some processing over here. What if you just didn't transfer the whole internet every 10 seconds? And what else is there for stuff? When finally we start asking, the more people get involved, the more factors we have to deal with, the more in the system that we actually understand rather than externalize. And right away and say, we just don't need to care about that part. The more we do that, the more holistically the system is going to be reasoned about. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out of that. So I'm actually very, very glad that you're doing the thing, because someone needs to.
I think there's a lot to be said that we're applying the same techniques across so many different systems, but not taking into account how unique those systems are. That idea that we apply back-end techniques into mobile, into the front end, they're subtly different. Like, the amount of bandwidth. Everybody assumes everybody's on a 5G network on their phone, can transfer at 5 gigabits a second. over Wi-Fi. Like, not everybody's in that situation. Some people are on a 2G connection on a mobile. And these are all things that we need to consider when we do it, aren't they?
I think it's one of those fascinating dualities of everything is different, but everything is the same. And in either case, the limiting factor seems to be we just don't transfer knowledge effectively and take what we already know somewhere and then put that elsewhere.
So what's the solution?
I think that the solution is going to be multifaceted. There's no nice little box for it. It's systems thinking. But like, how did you as an organization get better at learning across all the different parts in the organization? How does the industry get better at actually integrating that learning? So like as an example, one of the things that's always bugged me about observability is all these companies spend buckets on observability. They build their systems, they improve it. At no point does that learning about the system translate into anything anybody else can just download and share and get and acquire. And like, surely, if 60% of the development out there is front end, if 80% of that front end development is React, someone would have figured out how to share some type of knowledge about how to build a front end that's reliable. And I'm not seeing any of that shared, any of that built or abstracted, or any tools for that really being developed in the same way.
I think, to me, what's most important, so first of all, I completely agree with everything that was just said. And the way that I approach it is I like to start with the end user business results. Like I've said this many times, but at the end of the day, for those of us that work at companies and we all work in infrastructure and all of those things, we are there in service of the business goals. Like, we're not there to build beautiful infrastructure. We're there to, sell whatever widget it is that the company is actually selling. So the business goals are the most important things. And what I have often found crazy with the way that we approach many of these infrastructure systems is I think we tend to look at them as end results in and of themselves, right? Like, versus looking at the end result of what we're actually doing. And a key example of that is we as an industry, we love to talk about success rates. We love to talk about, SLOs and measuring success rates and looking at our 99.99, whatever, 7 nines, blah, blah, blah on our server. And the number of times in my career that, some JSON has like put apps into some perma crash situation, right? And like it's returning 200 from the server and no one knows, the SLO is perfect, everything's great, all the users are frustrated, they're quitting, they're like going to some other company. It's happened so many times. And that's just an example of we're solving all these technical problems, but are we solving the right problems?
As someone once wrote and put on a t-shirt, nines don't matter if users aren't happy.
Who was that?
My version of that one is you probably only need 1 9. It just has to be in the right place.
I agree. Absolutely. So my problem with observability, again, just as a industry, and I'm a vendor now, to be clear, is I don't know yet that as an industry, and this comes back to what Hazel was saying, is that I don't know that we're helping people solve the right problems and get the right information at the right price. Because at the end of the day, it's some intersection. It's a math formula, right? About like information versus price. There's some cost benefit trade-off. And as an industry, I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we have the right cost benefit trade-off.
Yeah. I 100% agree. Matt, I have enjoyed your blog posts so much over the past couple of years because you have come out with a flamethrower on multiple occasions. And when we were, for those at home, when we were doing our little pre-chat, you said something kind of spicy in our little group here, which was that something about, we were talking about the cost crisis and observability. And I think your line was, I don't think people care.
Yeah, that is a spicy take. And I think what I've realized over the last couple of years, it's not that people don't care, it's that typically in organizations, the users of observability systems are different from the buyers of observability systems. And that is a really key point in the sense that users of a system, you give them a Datadog interface, something that's been developed over many years and has lots of features and whatever else, and they're very happy. They don't care what it costs. It's the CFOs and the buyers and the people that, as you said, are looking at their bills go up 40% year over year. They care. What I've come to realize, though, is that in our effort, to bring better ROI in these tools, what's actually important is the product has to be better and it has to cost less, right? Like it has to be both. And I think what that means is that we have to get people better value for the data. And sorry, I'll just add one thing real quick. And this is going to be another spicy take, is that we had a lot of years in the mid 2010s, and these are mostly the observability I'm using air quotes, since we don't have video, for the observability 1.0 tracing systems. Observability 1.0 tracing systems, I'm just going to say, are useless. I mean, they are useless.
Yeah.
I mean, they're actually worse than useless. Like, they have negative value because you spend so much money and time, like, emitting all this data, and then find me a fucking trace that actually tells me anything about the problem that I'm facing. Impossible, right? And like, I was one of these people that deployed one of these systems and I regret it every day, right? And to me, that style of tracing is a great example of we as an industry put out these tools, we got people to buy them and they had negative ROI, right? It's like we're not helping people.
Also worse than useless because rolling out 1.0 tracing was such a massive organizational lift.
Absolutely.
It took so much coordination, and then the payoff was like not there. So people lost credibility that they desperately needed. And part of the reason it had, like, there are so many places that put in all this work to roll out Jaeger or something in the 1.0 era. And 2, 3, 4 years later, they have all the traces. But when somebody had the tracing problem, they go to there's like 1 or 2 priests. They're the people who understand. They go to the priesthood to ask for help with their tracing shape problem instead of going to the tracing tool because it's so siloed off. It's not connected to their data. Could not agree more.
Well, I would say, but that's assuming that the priest even has the data because it was probably sampled in a way that makes it impossible to find the data that you even need.
Yeah. And a lot of folks just threw up their hands and were like, well, I guess tracing sucks. When in fact, tracing in modern complex systems is necessary. But it's like a whole new generation that's having to figure out how to roll it out in a way that is like unified, no dead ends in your data and all this stuff.
I spent years as an advocate for no sampling because you should never do it. And then I realized when we started working with a rather large retail organization that was saying, oh, yeah, we're doing head sampling at 1 in 200,000. I'm like, what? It's like, yeah, we've still got 14 terabytes of data an hour coming through the system. I'm like, okay, that's probably a good reason to sample because they were getting the representative samples. I hate the current modern day sampling stuff.
Right. But for that unnamed organization who's doing the 1 in 2,000 or whatever sampling, and they still have the terabits of data, you go and talk to those developers about how often they can find a trace that is for their specific problem. The answer is often no, right? And that's where, again, like, I have my own biases about, why Bitdrift is doing what we're doing with the ring buffer and local storage. And I know Charity will say that that's not as applicable to server. And honestly, I agree.
Actually, I think it is applicable to servers. Because if you think of, and I'm going to go way off into the weeds here for a brief moment, as I want to do. If you think of observability and the distributed system and the cardinality of a distributed system, the cardinality of the distributed system can be looked at using measure theory in order to make a metric space. And so if you take the metric space and you break everything down to equivalence classes of a trace, rather than into a particular point of a trace, and what you're doing is you're actually using your tracing, you're using your sampling as a way to verify that you understand the behavior of the system better. Do you know what a normal trace under certain conditions looks like versus what an abnormal one looks like? Being able to validate that and scale by way of implementing your tracing and then being able to double check that is really, really valuable. And so the idea of having this sort of, we dump everything here and then we can sample here, maybe continue to sample and incrementally refine it. and then double check things.
Well, I'm not saying that there's absolutely no value, but I am saying that two of the hardest, most interesting questions in large multi-tenant systems with a lot of concurrency problems is always going to be what's happening right now and what just changed. So you can't wait for, oh, okay, I'm a developer, I'm now ready to look at it's just a different model. And I think to Matt's point from earlier, we need a lot of models to solve this problem.
I think too that whereas if you look at mobile, again, I'm biased. I think trying to do proper observability without the ring buffer, local storage, and control plane is basically impossible. I actually think it's impossible. On server, where I think we're going to land is more of a hybrid approach in the sense that there's always going to be logs that get sent all the time, right? It's like there's always going to be signals that get sent all the time, where I think that the local storage and the control plane will come into place on server is, maybe foreshadowing our future product areas, is I do think that there are types of tracing, especially process local, that can be driven entirely by this control plane system. So for example, let's say that I want to look for per user request data on a particular server, right? Like the ability to say that I want to monitor a particular user or a particular set of conditions and actually get an entire local trace within a process given those confines. I think what it will allow you to do is to, for example, have your logging, be at info level or general span level, but get super detailed data, for a particular use case. So I think on server, to your point, Hazel, I think we will see some of these hybrid systems. But again, I'm biased, but I do think that, this level of control in real time will be applicable in different places.
I think you can do it in real time as well. But you're also going to see a lot of security integration as well, because this is so much data. But the security tooling at some point is going to have to merge with the observability tooling in some sense. And same fire hose, they can both share the fire hose a little bit. Because if you're looking at highly compliant companies and a lot of regulation, they need to look at the packet level. They need to look at the network flow. They need to correlate that to every process on the machine. They need to correlate that. There are regulatory requirements to require that level of per packet inspection and per packet actually analysis of things.
I would actually think, here's my spicy take, I think the security use case might be one of the only ones that doesn't belong in the data lake, because the way that people need to interact with it is so different. Typically, I think you can just drop it in fucking Glacier and you don't need a lot of sophisticated analysis things, whereas with most other stuff, the analysis is the most important stuff.
We've probably covered observabilities 4, 5, 6, and 7 so far. And I had a question for each of you, really, which was, what does observability 10.0 look like? 10.0 is going to be probably the next 3 years. Where do we sort of see ourselves moving in terms of tooling and mindsets and users' mindsets and organizations' mindsets? So I'm going to go with Hazel first. What do you think is a 10.0 where we're going to be?
So I think you're going to see a couple different things all at once, sort of wrapping around things. One is you're going to see people sort of demanding that the ROI of your observability system or things of that nature come from more than just engineering. If just engineering is getting value from the product, why does it cost 10% of your entire or 20% of your entire budget? That might be a really hard question. People might start really, really wanting that. I don't know if it's going to be necessary. I think people are going to start asking the question of, okay, big expensive thing. Is the ROI just in engineering or is it more? And we want it to be in more. The other thing that I think is going to happen is we're going to start seeing a lot of the concepts of business intelligence and business analytics. These types of systems, the learnings that have happened over there for decades are going to start shifting over, and we're going to start cross-sharing maybe some data, cross-sharing some analysis, maybe some tools, maybe the blend and the line between this is business intelligence and this is observability is going to start becoming and looking a lot blurrier. So lastly, with that, systems thinking in general requires quick, dirty tools. And so you're going to start to see, as we understand how to do systems thinking better, people are going to demand from their observability tools less of, I want this polished, ornate, shiny button that does a thing, and more, I want a bunch of quick, dirty units like things that I can smash together to get information out of my system and actually reason with it. I want to get my hands dirty in this and play in the mud. And they're going to start wanting this out of the systems that have messaged and positioned themselves as polished. You're going to have to start figuring out what it means to be a polished system with messy tools.
So I think that it's interesting there. So what we're saying is everything's going to merge into BI and data and security, one big tool, everything's going to merge together. But also, everybody's going to go for their own little dirty tools. So we're essentially going to go and evolve, but also devolve at the same time. And we're going to disband between the two, which I think is kind of what we already do in every single industry. We amalgamate around one thing, and then everybody goes, that one thing doesn't work for me because you've tried to be one tool for everything. And then everybody goes, oh, I just want this quick and dirty one, which I think is perfect. So what about you, Matt? What's your alternative future?
I actually agree with much of that. I believe that, as was said, that the perceived ROI, the problem here is that, as we all know, measuring developer productivity, it's like impossible. People love to talk about it. People love to bloviate about it and attempt to measure it. And, there's some bullshit about Google measuring developer productivity and whatever else. It's like, it's very difficult to actually measure these things. So a lot of it is subjective. But at least from a perception standpoint, there's a perception in the industry right now that the money going in to observability is not yielding the sufficient ROI out. And I believe the solution to that we as an industry are going to have to iterate on, and this is where I differ with Hazel, is that I do think that though the tool is going to be similar or the same, maybe, I think there are different use cases. I agree with Charity that like the security 7-year storage use case in Glacier is different from the I want to debug right now use case. And I think that observability has to become a lot more dynamic, meaning when I'm debugging, I typically care right now, right? Like I want to know right now what's going on. Maybe I want a little bit of look back, but I want more control without doing deploys. If I'm doing security, I know mostly what I need for compliance. I want to store it for 7 years. And then there's some middle ground of things that I know that I want to alert on. And maybe I'm going to, get those on a more constant cadence. And I guess my point is today, I think the tools restrict us. We tend to have to emit logs and we have to use those for security for 7-year storage. And then we convolve the debugging cases and everything else in there. And I think to get the ROI correct, we have to look at these cases and basically allow the system to adapt and have a very real-time dynamic component, a long-term durable storage component, and make those knobs super easy to turn so that people feel that the data they're getting out, they're not using 1%, they're using 95%. And if they're not using that data, they just turn it off. So that's my observability 10.0, is it just has to be more dynamic.
Okay. Charity, what do you want from 10.0?
Matt, I think stole so many of my little bullet points there about the dynamic and the durable storage and 100%. So I guess in order to have something that is not just agreeing, I'll throw in a perspective of we've got to get better at, as Hazel said, aligning, what engineers are doing, the data. I think, yes, I think observability engineering teams are increasingly going to be data engineering teams. I think telemetry pipelines are emerging as a way for us to do a lot better data governance. But there are two different ways that observability makes a huge contribution to the bottom line. And I think that when it comes to the sort of external half, every big company has done a lot of work here. Google will talk about how for every 100 milliseconds you add to search, you drop 20% of blah, blah, blah. Or Amazon will be like shopping carts, just, user interfaces. It's pretty easy for us to quantify an ROI on that data. But when it comes to the internal half of observability, I think of it like the dark matter of software engineering. It's the stuff you can't see because things are just slow, but you can't see why they're slow. all you can see is all the things that you keep having to do, and so much of this sense making comes down to having observability that allows you to make sense of your systems in pretty much real time. And it's like, I use this metaphor a lot, but it's like putting on your glasses before you go barreling down the freeway. If you can't get those feedback loops fast enough, then you feel like you're veering all over. You're constantly like changing course. And when your sense making is fast and effortless, it feels like you're just driving. It feels like you're just building. And I think that AI has so much to, like, we haven't really talked about AI at all, which is kind of weird, but like,
I'm really impressed. We've done well.
I know, right?
Well done, everyone. Pat yourself on the back.
But when it comes to instrumentation, I think a lot of the cost crisis has been built by this sort of like drivers of auto instrumentation that has gathered a ton of shit that people don't actually need or want, but it's how they built their dashboards and their insights, so they can't turn it down and it's generating all this crap. And I think that AI is going to help us there. I think that we're going to move from dashboards to workflows, and that we're really going to pay, like, developing with AI requires fast feedback loops to do it right and do it well. And so my hope is that we're going to get better at identifying the cost of bad observability or not having observability. And that teams are going to start to connect the dots between the dark matter that is just constantly like slowing us down and making it feel like we can't make progress, because it feels like a lot of changes are kind of converging in the same direction. And ultimately, I think that's right. I think developers don't really care about the cost of their tools. I think that what they do care about is that cost is not the absolute dollars, but it's the rate of increase is unsustainable. And the value that we're getting out of our tools, you should have predictable cost growth, and it should go up or down as the amount that you spend goes up or down, right? The value and the cost should be going up or down in alignment with each other. And that's what I think a lot of the experimentation on our part and a lot of vendors in the market consists of right now.
I think developers, at the end of the day, they just don't want to get yelled at about cost, right? They want to do their job. They want to have, all the data that they need to actually solve their problems, and they don't want someone coming and actually yelling at them. And as we were saying before, it's completely subjective as to what is the right number. Is 20% of your budget the right number? 10, 5, 1? You're not going to get one answer on that.
But there's a big difference that I want to call out between, are you managing your observability bill as a cost center or as an investment? For cost center, you just minimize it. And if it's an investment, you try to find the point at which you reach diminishing returns. And you want to spend up to that point, because the point of an investment is it pays for itself and then some. Hopefully it pays for itself 5 times over, 10 times over.
Yeah. And this is where, if we want to end on the hottest take, at least for myself, I'll say that at least in the industry today, where most observability vendors are charging by ingested data volume, this is where I think the incentives can be off, right? And I do think as an industry, we have to evolve. And again, I'm biased, at Bitdrift, we do not charge on data volume. Like, we're charging more on the workflows, on the state machines, on those types of things. Is that correct? I have no idea. We're a tiny company. But I do think that, the volume-based incentives, I think we vendors have to be incentivized to, again, try to get people to use more of the data that they're actually producing. To me, that is, if we're to come up with one metric that matters, it's how much data that you emit do you ever look at? And I feel like as an industry, we should try to optimize that.
So I think we could probably do sort of a series of 20 of these podcasts and still not really have gone deep enough. But unfortunately, we have to really think about our listeners' time because they don't have 4 hours. So I think we'll probably have to call it there. Maybe we'll come back in a few months and we'll do something new. We'll find out whether everybody's approach is done. Maybe we'll come back in 4 years and we'll find out what 10.0 really looked like. So yeah, where can we find you, Matt? Online? Are you on Blue Sky, Twitter, X, whatever?
These days, LinkedIn and Blue Sky, I guess. I don't know. I feel like social media is kind of a mess these days. Don't know.
And what about you, Hazel? Where can we find you?
You can find me pretty much everywhere except the file system websites. So I'm on Blue Sky, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Mastodon, and my website is hazelweekly.me. And you can find all the links there.
Okay, so if you want to know where the spice is, you know where to find it in all those places. But thank you so much for joining us. It's been an amazing discussion.
Super fun.
Thank you so much.
That's all we have time for today. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you would like to suggest a topic, find us on Twitter at o11ycast. That's o11ycast. o11ycast is brought to you by Heavybit, the leading investor in developer-first startups. To learn more about Heavybit, visit heavybit.com.